talk about the backbone of history, women. And here, in particular, the lady of the house, the woman who made it all real every day, Dolley Madison. You're writing a book about her story and her experience. You've studied it. Share a little bit about Dolley and how her impact on that history as well as on this place and the White House and everything she seemed to have touched. I think of all the first ladies maybe outside of, certainly modern era, someone like Jackie Kennedy or Michelle Obama, Dolley Madison, people are like, yeah, that was a cupcake, right? Now, so people know. But I mean, share a little bit of her history and her story.
I will, but I want to go back first to something we were talking about before, which is Dorothy Height as the not the creator of, but the long-standing leader of the National Council of Negro Women. And my mother worked with Dorothy Height during the Civil Rights Movement, and one of the things that Dr. Height always talked about was women as the backbone of society. And yet, and therefore, she was head of a women's only organization and worked with women around the country and especially in the South. And yet at the same time, I would like to remind all of us that black men got the vote before white women. Yeah. So when we think about who we are as a country and what our diversity is and so on and so forth, Dolley is both representative and singular, as we all are. And I think that when Dolley was only the mistress of Montpelier as the wife of James Madison here full-time from 1817 to 1836. And I think that's important in terms of her and Montpelier to remember. So that from 1801, when James Madison's father dies and Thomas Jefferson assumes the presidency and asks James Madison to be his Secretary of State, and so the Madisons moved to Washington, D.C., and remained there until 1817. Now, they're back and forth, but nevertheless, there's nothing quite like somebody always being on the spot and running things. I think a couple of other things about Dolley Madison. First of all, to Dr. Jeffries' point, I think that, in fact, James Madison actually didn't really want to get caught up in the system of slavery. And he bought land in New York, and he did hope for himself to extricate himself from what he knew was a bad situation. But he didn't. Dolley was part of that because by the time we get into the 1790s, James Madison, well, there's James Madison Sr., but James Madison Jr.'s brother, first one brother dies, and then another brother dies, and it becomes increasingly imperative that he run the show. But the second thing is that he marries, in 1794, Dolley Madison, then Dolly Payne Todd. And she had grown up on a plantation, was the child of Quakers, her first marriage was to a Quaker abolitionist, but I truly believe she wanted to return to a situation where she would be taken care of by slaves. That for her contentedness and happiness, she envisioned it inside of the system of enslavement in a way that I think probably was not true for James Madison. And one way I think that's actually reflected is, do you all know who Paul Jennings was? If you go back and it's online, you read Paul Jennings' memoir, and when he talks about Dolley Madison and James Madison, what comes through very clearly to me is how much he deeply respected James Madison and how profoundly, in many ways, he disliked Dolley Madison. So we have a very different kind of situation here. I want to end this little piece here by saying where Dolley is important in our national history is that as a new nation, there are many things that had to be established, not simply a constitution, not simply the acceptance of political parties, not simply the understanding of states and the expansion of the nation, but we need a republican culture. And who were we to be as people? What did we understand? How we dressed, how we displayed ourselves, how we ate. Now, of course, it's fractured. There are many different ways in which we all eat and go back to our ethnic and racial roots. But nevertheless, to have a united center, that center has to reflect something about who we are as a people. And Dolley did that. Now, she did that within a white environment, but not in a way I think that was ultimately exclusive of people who are not white. And what she did is she said, we're not Europe. We're not like George Washington, who when people came to greet George Washington for tea in the afternoon, he and Martha Washington would be on a dais so that you would come and you would bow to him. This was very monarchical. Nor was he as radical, if you will, as Thomas Jefferson, who in 1803 received the new British minister in soiled corduroys and slippers. Mm-hmm. They had to create something that would work. It would work at home and it would work abroad. And that James Madison really in many ways left to Dolley. So that when there is the inauguration, on the one hand, James Madison dresses in a good merino wool suit, an American suit made from wool grown in America. But Dolley wore a simple velvet gown for the ball in the afternoon and a cambric for the day, and did not emulate what would have been European. It's hard for us to go back and imagine what Europe was like at the time, but those Europeans who came here by and large, not as settlers, but as ministers, were aristocrats. And they would look at the White House and see it as a rather small place. And if you compare the White House to Buckingham Palace, you can see what they would have thought. And they saw America in that sense as a rather rural and undignified place. So one of the things that she does is she raises the level of dignity of the more Republican sort, of a more ordinary sort. And she does that through dress, as I say. She wears pearls rather than diamonds. She does that through food. She does that through entertaining. She does that through the establishment and the furnishings of the White House. So I think that if we look at somebody who helps to bind the nation, this is Dolley as a sort of meta figure, as opposed to Dolley as a particular individual who we may not always think we would have liked.